The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The Right Honourable Prime Minister! Yeah! Yeah, baby! What a crazy week just in news in general, but specifically with what's happening in Parliament and even more specifically in the House of Commons. Late last night, you had an emergency live stream debate that took place. I very much last minute turned on the cameras and streamed it, and you had Melissa Landsman go on this just awesome speech, right? About 20 minutes long. That was actually the video this morning. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend you do it. But she points out the hypocrisy of the government of how during the convoy early 2022, you had Liberal MPs get up and say, honk honk stands for Hail Hitler, and therefore we should stop truckers from protesting and stop people from saying honk honk. Yet right now, today, you have members like Jagmeet Singh that go to protests out in the public in Canada that stand with Hezbollah flags and Hamas flags. So you talk about who supports, who's racist, who supports terrorism. It's just really sick and twisted. But nonetheless, that's kind of what happened yesterday. Today, they resumed House of Commons, House of Canada, right? Question period. And that got completely insane. Justin Trudeau almost slipped up and said crap or shit or something along the sorts, and he segued into saying something different. And Pierre Poilievre really made sure that Justin Trudeau was on his heels today. Whether those are high heels or something else, we don't really know. But nonetheless, Trudeau really slipped up quite a few times. And then you had Pierre Poilievre, surprisingly, addressed the House Speaker directly. Now, every time they get up and they say, Mr. Speaker, that's just a formality of, our parliamentary system. But he said, you, Speaker, and he looked directly at him. You previously have, talked about how Justin Trudeau, and you've noticed how Justin Trudeau is part of all these different scams and these controversies, and how he spent millions of dollars and he's covering things up. And he directly, it's up to your interpretation. My interpretation was that Pierre Poilievre, while doing this speech to the House Speaker, he basically called for the arrest or the investigation into Justin Trudeau's criminal behavior with Canadian finances, of covering things up. And we all know that he's doing these things. It's very, very clear. There's been breakdowns by other YouTube channels of just the corruption that runs deep into the Liberal coalition governments. And I thought that was very interesting that Pierre Poilievre pretty much called for the arrest or the investigation into Justin Trudeau's criminal behavior. So what I've gathered, just like I do after, a lot of these crazy question periods, is the highlight reel of today's question periods. I hope you stick around for the full thing because there's some really good zingers. There's some very important information that gets thrown around. And then you see Justin Trudeau just full out panic. But you also see the Bloc Québécois, and this is very important to notice. The Bloc Québécois has not received one out of the two things that they are asking for. Yesterday, the Liberals denied one of those. So the Bloc has said, if we don't get both these things that we're asking for, come October 29th, that's our deadline. And we're going to be voting in favor of a non-confidence. And they've hinted at the potential of an election before Christmas, before the new year. And it really seems like we're heading in that direction. So before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. It does really help grow the channel. We are very close to 407,000 subscribers. Absolutely insane. Thank you, by the way, to all the subscribers, all the channel members, everyone who's contributed to the growth of and the community here on this channel. Without further ado, here is today's question period highlight.
Questions.
Oral questions. Questions. Honorable Leader of the Opposition to be next Prime Minister Canada, Pierre Poilievre.
Prime Minister is hiking taxes on home builders, on doctors, on job creators, and on farmers. And he's also raising taxes on hospitals and schools. The New Brunswick Premier is taking this Prime Minister to court because of the unconstitutional quadrupling carbon tax and the costs it will impose on snowplows, ambulances, heating hospitals and schools, meaning the loss of countless police officers, nurses, doctors, and teachers. Instead of defeating the carbon tax in court, why can't we have a carbon tax election so Canadians can axe the tax?
There you go. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Call the election.
Mr. Speaker, for the past number of years, multiple Conservative premiers have gone after the price on pollution in courts, and they lost at the Supreme Court. The Canadians have decided that price on pollution is the right thing. We've won multiple elections on that because Canadians know that the only way to build a strong economy is to fight climate change at the same time. The Leader of the Opposition doesn't get that, doesn't accept that, doesn't understand that abandoning the fight against climate change would hurt Canadians, would hurt our institutions, would hurt people and economic growth right across the country.
No, Canadians did not vote for a carbon tax.
Mr. Speaker, and he concealed from both the courts and from Canadians his plan to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Now, Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan says that this will hit schools with $204 million in carbon taxes and hospitals with $175 million in carbon taxes, meaning we will lose doctors, teachers, and other necessary workers serving Canadians. Instead of forcing premiers to fight to axe the tax in court, why can't we have a carbon tax election so Canadians can axe the tax?
There you go. W's for Pierre, huh? Let's keep the momentum.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is proposing that we abandon all the fight against climate change. He wants to take away the Canada carbon rebate that puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians, the middle class and people working hard to join it, even as we both fight climate change, reduce emissions in this country, and create growth and opportunities in cleaner jobs and cleaner careers. These are the issues that Canadians are preoccupied with. How are they going to be able to afford jobs into the future when this leader wants to take away the fight against climate change?
The Liberal government is not worth the cost of food. The food professor estimates that between 2022 and 2025, the cost of food will be up 34%. That's a time that coincides exactly with the NDP Liberal coalition. Coincidentally, the NDP leader's chief spokesman and brother, his company is a lobbyist for Metro. But the food professor blames the increase on carbon taxes on farmers and truckers who bring us our food. Before Canadians go hungry, why won't the Prime Minister allow a carbon tax election so Canadians can axe the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, farmers across this country are feeling the impacts of the extreme weather events that come from climate change, whether it's droughts or wildfires or floods. We are seeing the costs of climate change every single day. And we put forward a price on pollution that not only brings down emissions and creates more solutions and economic growth, it also puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians right across the country. It's the parliamentary budget officer who says that.
No.
Continue to fight.
No, they said the opposite, and you gagged them.
To abandon the fight against climate change.
That's not what PBO said.
The opposition.
The Prime Minister loves to blame the rest of the world for the rampant food price inflation here at home. But the food professor proves that narrative false. He has calculated that food prices have risen 36% faster in Canada than in the United States of America. What does Canada have that the Americans don't have? 2 words: carbon tax.
Wow.
So instead of forcing Canadians to line up at food banks, why won't he let them line up to vote in a carbon tax election?
There you go. W's for Pierre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't dare say anything after the last question because I sort of couldn't believe my ears. But here we have the Leader of the Opposition actually quoting some sort of expert, which is a brand new thing for this House of Commons. To rely on facts and data is an excellent thing to hear. Now, perhaps the Leader of the Opposition will listen to the hundreds of economists and scientists who have pointed out that putting a price on pollution, particularly one that puts more money back in the pockets of the middle class and those working hard to join it, is the best way to both fight climate change and grow the economy. But the leader opposite, he just wants to play politics.
Look at that. Fake enthusiasm. Come on.
Colleagues, I ask all members, including the member from Peterborough, Halliburton, Brock, to only take the microphone, take the floor when he's recognized by the Speaker. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister! Yeah! Yeah, baby!
And I've got some more expert information for the Prime Minister from the food professor Sylvain Charlebois, who finds that 13% of Americans live in food insecurity, while here in Canada it's 23%. In other words, Canadians are twice as likely to live in food security after food price of inflation has been 1/3 higher under this Prime Minister's carbon tax regime. Again, instead of blaming others or forcing Canadians to go hungry, why not a carbon tax election so that Canadians can axe the tax and afford their food?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the Leader of the Opposition is playing politics, we're focused on delivering solutions.
This is
we
politics,
a
you
national
dummy.
food program that's going to help 400,000 kids have fuller bellies at schools across the country and save Canadian families $800 a year on grocery bills. And if the Leader of the Opposition actually cared about food security in this country, you might imagine he'd have voted for that. Instead, not only did he vote against it, he pretends it doesn't exist. He pretends it hasn't happened. He's gaslighting Canadians on the things we're doing to fight affordability challenges. Instead, he's just offering political games.
It's not gaslighting. He's pointing out the failures. You're gaslighting.
The opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's a food program without food. It hasn't served a single ham sandwich, not a single bowl of Kraft dinner, not even a piece of broccoli has been forced upon an unwilling kid. Mr. Speaker, this is meant to feed bureaucracy, not feed kids. Meanwhile, there's a 42% increase in the food bank use in Mississauga, and 2 million Canadians are lined up at food banks. 1/4 of children are going hungry after 9 years of his carbon taxes. Why can't we have a carbon tax election?
Well said, Honourable Prime Minister. Pierre Poilievre.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition actually cared about vulnerable Canadians, he'd be offering solutions, not just more politics. He stood against...
Dude, this is politics. What the hell are you talking about?
Colleagues.
Accusing him of doing politics is accusing him of doing his job?
Honourable Prime Minister, to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, this campus conservative turned career politician doesn't actually care about Canadians.
Ooh.
What he's actually doing is proposing to take money out of the pockets of 8 of the 10 Canadians who do better with the Canada carbon rebate while we fight climate change. He stood against dental care that is delivering for over 800,000 people across this country, something he still says doesn't exist. He's standing against the school food policy that is helping 400,000
Oh, he's stuttering a lot.
food across the country. He stood against childcare. He has stood against affordability measures.
That was tough. That was tough for him. Here we go, Pierre.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when you quadruple the tax on the farmers who grow the food and on the truckers who ship the food, you tax all who buy the food. The Canadian Trucking Alliance has calculated that the carbon tax will cost $20,000 for every long-haul truck this year alone. Now he wants to quadruple the tax, which will grind those trucks to a halt, meaning empty shelves in grocery stores, no parts for factories, and no paychecks for our workers. Instead of doing that, why not call a carbon tax election so that Canadians can axe the tax and save our economy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect that, like me, you have noticed that the Leader of the Opposition is particularly full of shameless slogans today. The reality...
Whoa!
nothing to offer. He has
That was tricky.
political slogans and easy attacks on politics. No actually moving forward on delivering on programs that are going to help Canadians. No stepping up to put more money in people's pockets. He's offering tax breaks for the wealthiest and cuts for services and programs to everyone else. That's not what Canadians need right now.
Whoa, that was tricky. Tricky dicky.
I'd like to remind the Right Honourable Prime Minister and all members of this House that this is not an avenue where we want to go down. It can easily get out of control, and I would suggest that we don't go that close to the line. The Honourable Order.
Oh, shh. Shh. Everybody
The
shush.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, every time I mention a carbon tax election, he becomes so panicked and erratic that he loses control of himself and starts spitting out incomprehensible insults. When Canadians deserve us focusing on them. The fact that after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, we have 2 million people lined up at food banks, a record-smashing number. After 9 years, 1 in 4 kids are going to school hungry. Before more kids go to school hungry, why can't we have a carbon tax election so that Canadians can axe the tax and afford their food?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Canada Carbon Rebate puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians right across the country. It supports the middle class and people working hard to join it while we successfully fight against climate change, reduce emissions, and grow the economy. But the leader opposite still doesn't understand that you can't have an economic plan if you don't have an environmental plan. His plan is to abandon the fight against climate change, leave Canadians to their own devices, lower taxes for the wealthiest, leave everyone else to fend for themselves. That's not what Canadians do.
Pierre's got Trudeau on his heels, on his high heels.
Canada's workers get 55 cents of investment for every dollar an American worker gets, and only 65 cents for every dollar an OECD average worker gets. For a net 450 billion Canadian investment dollars have poured out into the U.S., more than have come back under this Prime Minister's 9 years. And The Economist points out that our GDP per capita is now lower than Alabama. And it says, and I quote, catching up to Alabama may soon seem like a distant dream. Why?
What? What the hell's going on with our country?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are facing difficult times right now, which is why we made the choice to invest in things like dental care, like cutting child care fees in half for families right across the country, $10 a day in 6 jurisdictions across the country. Why we've chosen to step up on dental, why we're choosing to step up on pharmacare to deliver free insulin and prescription contraceptives to people who are having to make choices between their health and their rent or their food. These are the things we're choosing to make because we are putting the best balance sheet in the G7, the lowest deficit in the G7, in service of Canadians who need support.
Not only has the Prime Minister and his government taxed Canadians into poverty, his former Environment Minister called single moms and small businesses arsonists because they oppose the carbon tax. Meanwhile, he ignored the warnings of his own Parks Department that the Jasper Valley had turned into a tinderbox. Warnings that go back to 2017, 7 years ago. Repeated warnings to clear the brush and do controlled burns. Why didn't his government do the job and prevent or mitigate this disastrous fire?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is always astonishing to hear the Leader of the Opposition talk about the impacts of the extreme weather events related to climate change while he opposes any climate action at all. He has no plan to fight climate change, which means no plan for affordability, which means no plan for the future of the Canadian economy. We have a price on pollution that is putting more money back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians where it applies, and is bringing down emissions and creating growth and jobs. That's what Canadians need.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he pretends you can put out forest fires with taxes. Clearly that has not worked.
Whoa.
What he's done is listen to his own officials who said that the mass buildup of fuel in the Jasper Valley as a result of dead trees needed to be addressed through controlled burns and other clearing methods, and also preparation so that we would have the ability to fight the fire if and when it ever started. All of this is documented in email correspondence and now testimony at a parliamentary committee. Instead of taxing Canadians into poverty, why didn't he fight forest fires?
Man, that is awesome that Pierre's standing up to that.
Mr. Speaker, Jasper was one of the most fire-smart communities in the country. Over the past years, residents and leaders within Jasper have been exemplary in making sure they were doing everything they could to protect their community. This fire, Mr. Speaker,
I don't know why he's calling me they, but
it jumped from treetop to treetop and through flaming pine cones, kilometers into ahead of it, which is what set this burn. This is a result of climate change, Mr. Speaker. Climate change he doesn't want to fight.
Woo-wee! So how much money until forest fires stop?
So does the people of Jasper.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that kind of erratic screaming and hollering is not going to tackle the problem of forest fires, screaming about pine cones, etc. It's true, the people of Jasper were fire smart. The problem is that the government in Ottawa was fire stupid.
Holy crap!
Was warned repeatedly over 7 years that they needed to clear the dead wood to prevent the spread of a future fire. Why, instead of bringing in a crippling carbon tax, didn't he clear away the wood and stop leaving a tinderbox to explode?
Can we get some banned pine cones in the chat? Ban
Prime Minister.
Pine cones.
Mr. Speaker, one of the jewels of Canada's natural beauty burned because of climate change. And his focus is trying to blame Ottawa for that. That, Mr. Speaker, is completely irresponsible and shameful. But we have all seen that from this Conservative leader, who would rather try and rile people up and point figures than actually try to solve any of the challenges Canadians are facing, either today with affordability or tomorrow with climate change. That's not leadership.
BPC. Ban pine cones.
I'll tell you it's not leadership. I'll tell you it's not leadership. That in February of this year, email correspondence within his government confirmed that they were canceling a controlled burn specifically for political optics. They did not want to do controlled burns. They did not want to do the same kind of forest management and maintenance that Indigenous people had done for thousands of years, and that had been recommended by both people on the ground and officials in the department. The reality is he didn't do his job. He should be accountable and explain why he let the valley go up in smoke and used a carbon tax to hide behind it all.
Yeah. Politicizing forest fires, man.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in this era of droughts and rising temperatures and climate change, there are certainly reasons that most reasonable people could imagine why the opting for a mechanical removal of underbrush instead of flaming them, instead of setting them on fire, might be a better option. Mr. Speaker, the attack on experts, the attack on science, and the refusal to understand that if we do not act in fighting against climate change with everything we have, then there will be no economy of the future. There will be no Jasper to rebuild. There will be no future for Canadians.
Does Trudeau love Jasper?
Max Carney, at the moment of his appointment as the head of the economic task force of this government, said he wanted to do something and not be something. So what has he done? Well, he's now sending out fundraising letters to raise cash for the Liberal Party. 2, he's asked for $10 billion of corporate welfare to help his multinational corporation take over the pension funds of Canadians. And he's got his pal a $2 billion loan. Did the Prime Minister, yes or no, clear all of these actions of carbon tax Carney with the lobbying commissioner?
Dude, this whole carbon tax Carney thing is it's so greasy.
One of the things we're seeing right across the country are experts and people who've succeeded in all sorts of different backgrounds stepping up to push back against the cuts and little vision that the Conservative Party has been putting forward. The fact is, the Leader of the Opposition is offering cuts to services that Canadians are relying on and offering tax breaks to the wealthiest, like Conservatives always do. We're there to invest for every generation. No wonder Canadians from all backgrounds are stepping up to be part of pushing back against that Conservative leader.
The fact of the matter is, protect pine cones.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
You, Mr. Speaker, have said that this Prime Minister is violating the rules of the House by refusing to hand over SDTC documents on a corporate welfare scandal of $400 million that the Auditor General says involved 186 conflict of interest, where bureaucrats, top officials in this Liberal government, were giving millions of dollars to their own companies. Will the Prime Minister hand over the information to the police? And if not, what's he got to hide?
Wow! W's, man, W's.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader just mentioned both the police and the Auditor General. Let me say what they have said. Both the RCMP and the Auditor General have raised concerns about how this motion jeopardizes their independence in serving Canadians. The Conservative Party wants to play politics with Canadians' charter rights. We will not support that.
I don't ever want to hear Trudeau say Charter of Rights.
His idea of a charter right is that you have the right as a top government executive to take $400 million of other people's money and give it to your own company and then hide the criminal evidence from the police. Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians have the charter right to know where their money went. So will the Prime Minister accept your order and the vote of this House to turn over the documents to the police so that we can put the bad guys in jail and get back the money that was stolen?
Holy smokes, totes my goats, man! Hair's on fire! Arrest Trudeau for the cover-ups.
Speaker, once again, the Conservative Party has demonstrated that it is willing to upend the independence of institutions like the RCMP and the Auditor General for political gain. That is what they are proposing to do. They want to direct investigations. They want control over judicial processes in their details. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, banana republic-style behavior that the Conservative is pushing. We will always stand up for Canadians' charter rights and the independence of our institutions.
Get out of here! Dude, he's been huffing his own farts for far too long.